How does a team in the NFL make the playoffs? It's a very common question, and it's something that a lot of people can get wrong. So let's dive in on this episode of the Ballhawk Sports Podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ballhawk Sports Podcast. In our episode today, we are going to tackle the NFL playoffs. Now, for those of you that aren't aware, 7 teams from each conference make it. That's the 4 conference winners, the East, North, South, and West. And then the 3 wildcard spots, and those are just done by record and tiebreakers and however that's decided. But to start us off, let's go through what the playoffs looked like last year so that we have a better idea of when we go looking forward to next season, how it might all shake out. So starting off in the AFC, we have the winner of the AFC West, the Kansas City Chiefs. They got the 1 seed. The Buffalo Bills won the AFC East. They got the 2 seed. The Baltimore Ravens won the AFC North. They got the 3 seed. And the 4 seed was the Houston Texans, who won the AFC South. Now, the 3 wild cards was the LA Chargers. They got the 5 seed. The Pittsburgh Steelers got the 6 seed. And the Denver Broncos got the 7th seed. Now, in the NFC, you had the Detroit Lions got the 1 seed, winning the NFC North. The Philadelphia Eagles won the 2 seed, and they won their division, the NFC East. The number 3 seed was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They won the NFC South. And the NFC West was won by the LA Rams. The 3 wildcard teams was the 5 seed Minnesota Vikings, the 6 seed Washington Commanders, and the 7 seed Green Bay Packers. Now, everything that I'm about to get into statistically and the rankings, they're all provided by Football Reference, so thank you to them for having all the stats generated and being able to put them on screen here in just a second. So I want to start off with some generalizations about how the playoff system typically ends up going when it comes to predicting what teams are going to make it every single year. So the NFL is a league of parity. As much as we love football and how it goes, a lot changes year over year. So typically a year in the NFL will have a minimum of 4 new playoff teams every single year. Now it can be higher, but typically what you see is at least 4 teams get replaced every single season. So last year you had the Dallas Cowboys, the San Francisco 49ers, the Cleveland Browns, and the Miami Dolphins didn't make it back from the previous season. That's 4 teams. 2 years ago, for the 2023 playoffs, it was the Los Angeles Chargers, the Cincinnati Bengals, the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Seattle Seahawks, the Minnesota Vikings, and the New York Giants. That's 6 teams that didn't make it back from the previous season. And then going back 3 years to the 2022 season, it was the Los Angeles Rams, the Green Bay Packers, the Arizona Cardinals, the Las Vegas Raiders, the Tennessee Titans, the Pittsburgh Steelers, and the New England Patriots. And that is a grand total of 7 teams that did not make it back from the previous season. That's half the playoff pool. So as that shows, there's a lot of history of a lot of turnover in the NFL, which just leads to show why it is a parity-based league and nothing is ever, set in stone for the most part when it comes to what teams make it every year. That's one of the things that make football great for us. But another thing that people generally believe, and does generally seem to be true, is that top-level quarterbacks are helpful, but they are not a guarantee. You do need some level of a full team and a full group of 52 players or 53 players going out in the field and making it work. This past season, we saw Joe Burrow, Brock Purdy, and Tua Tagovailoa all miss the playoffs. But basically every other top quarterback you could think of made the playoffs. And of the teams that made the playoffs, only the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Minnesota Vikings did not have a franchise quarterback to take them to the playoffs. So looking at it, you look at 2 of the 14 teams that made it last year had a top-level quarterback to some degree. You can make some arguments about Sam Darnold, but the Steelers definitely did not have a top-level quarterback. And even though Matt Stafford's getting older with the Rams, you have some young guys like Jordan Love who haven't really, shown as much as you'd like to see from someone you would consider a franchise quarterback. It is still that top level, especially compared to what the Steelers were putting out specifically. But it's like I said, it's helpful you want to have that top level quarterback. It's one of the big conversations that I think should be had more about when you draft a quarterback is these guys like the Mac Joneses and the Alex Smiths of the world, like they do a good job with what they're asked, but they don't do much beyond that. And there's a ceiling to where you can get to when that is what is being done. When that's being what is put in front of you, that's a problem. Like you really can't get to where you want to go unless you have some form of a really good quarterback. Now that it comes in different shapes and sizes, as you can look around the league and see, but generally you want a great quarterback. Another thing that has come to light in the last few years, especially with the larger schedule going up to 17 games, is 10 wins almost always will mean that you get in. Only the Seahawks last year missed the playoffs, having only gotten 10 wins. They lost a tiebreaker to the Rams, who had the same record in their division. They did miss the wild card game by a full game, which is more to do about how bad the NFC was last year than the Seahawks themselves. But only 2 teams with a winning record actually last year didn't make the playoffs. That's the 10-7 Seahawks we just talked about, and the 9-8 Bengals, who put in a really good fight at the end, but just weren't able to get it done. Now that shows that the disparity in the top level teams and the bottom level teams last year was larger. Hopefully that can become tighter, as it's not typical that you see, first of all, that you see a 10-win team not make it, but also that you only see 2 teams with a winning record not as winning record, just period, outside of it. So you had literally a direct split of 16 teams last year had a winning record out of the 32, which is good to see. But there were a lot of high win teams, and a bunch of teams that finished at 8 and 9, where you're like, hey, one game could have swung it either way, but wouldn't have gotten them in the playoffs. That's why I put the number at 10 wins gets you in, for the most part. I would probably say 90% of the time, if you're going to win 10 games nowadays, you're going to get in. They're outliers, but there always is. But now I want to get into some statistics around whether teams make the playoffs and what a playoff team typically looks like when it comes to the end of the season statistical values. And one of the things I want to talk about immediately is turnovers. Turnovers is a widely discussed thing. It's always a huge turning point for a lot of teams when they get turnovers, and it's a complete momentum killer when they give the ball away. And the stats back it up for making the playoffs, as 8 of the top 10s in creating turnovers, so that's getting the other team to turn over the ball, made the playoffs, including the top 7 teams. So creating turnovers leads to wins and leads to success. And then on the other side of things, the top 7 teams and 9 of the top 10 teams in the lowest offensive giveaways, that means that they're giving the ball away the least, also made the playoffs. The only one that didn't there was the Bears, who came in at number 8, and they had a 5-12 record. They had kind of a funky season. They just were really good at keeping the ball out of other players' hands. But moving on to scoring, the top 9 teams in the lowest points allowed made the playoffs last year. And the top 5 teams in most points scored, and 10 of the top 11 teams in most points scored made the playoffs. The Bengals finished at number 6 and had an 8-9 record. They were the outlier there. Now, this might seem obvious, as if you score the most points and you don't give up the most, and you give up the least points, you're typically going to make it to the playoffs. But it goes deeper than that, because you want to, even though you can score a lot of points, if you're not stopping people from scoring as well, then it doesn't line up. Now, a lot of the teams in the 2 rankings, they did have a lot of overlap, and some teams had coverage. Like the Commanders didn't finish as high in the points allowed. They allowed a little bit more points, but they were higher in the points scored, and that's what kind of evened them out. So you don't need to be number 1 in both and be that dominant. You can finish 8th in points allowed and 8th in points scored, and you're gonna have a great record. It's a really good indicator, other than just looking at the scores and seeing, we won 35-6 this week. We won 21-7 the week after. That's gonna create a good divide and show where you're gonna land at the end of the season. But, as the season goes on, if you're a team giving up 30 points a game or 20 points a game and you're only scoring 24 points a game, that's not where you want to be. You want to get some of that space to happen. You don't want to be the Chiefs having to win all these tight games, as great as they were making it to the Super Bowl last year and the last few years. There comes a point where that ticket becomes due, and you've seen it in the past. If you can remember back to the Vikings from a few years ago when they made the playoffs, they had problems the following year and the year before that because they had the 1 year run of just finishing really well in tight games, and then the karmic relief was before and after. So they had a terrible year the year before, the year they made the playoffs. I believe it was 2022, where they lost a lot of close games. And then the year they made the playoffs, they won a lot of close games. The year after that, they then went back to losing a lot of close games. So, you want to be a team, if you want to make the playoffs, that isn't keeping it close, that's stopping teams from coming back and also allowing themselves to create that separation. And that, I think, is the bigger point to take away from this topic of scoring, because, it's really easy to look at it and be like, oh, the top teams that in the lowest points allowed, they won. And the team that scored the most points, they also won. Well, that's great, but there's always a nuance to it, and I think that's the nuance there. But moving on to the rushing. Now, one of the things I'll get into in a little bit when we get to passing is that rushing is currently, in the way the NFL is being run, is a really good indicator of team success and, being able to get into the playoffs. So the top 6 teams in total team rushing yards made the playoffs. Only 3 of the top 11 teams in team rushing yards didn't make the playoffs. That's going to be the Arizona Cardinals, who finished at number 7, who also had an 8-9 record, the Indianapolis Colts at number 8 with an 8-9 record, and the Falcons, who finished 10th with an 8-9 record. Now, like I said earlier, a lot of teams finished below 500 last year, and a lot of teams, were close. And this is one of the points that's made here. You can look at each of those teams, the Cardinals, the Colts, and the Falcons, and I can point out to you exactly why they didn't make it. The Cardinals, their pass rush on defense, not good. They just weren't able to create enough turnovers and stop the yardage enough that it didn't make a difference, so their ability to run the ball wasn't able to translate because their defense didn't hold them up. The Colts had a quarterback problem. They weren't able to operate the game the way that the head coach and the other players would want, so their running game was helping keeping them in games, and their defense was trying their best, but the quarterback not being solved, which goes back to one of the earlier points, it just wiped out their chance of making it to the playoffs. And then the Falcons are very similar to the Cardinals, kind of a mix between the Cardinals and the Colts, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, in the fact that they didn't have the best quarterback play from Kirk Cousins, but they also had a problem rushing the passer. They've had a problem rushing the passer for a while. I think they need to infuse their team with more pass rushing, so hopefully they'll do that in the draft, as it's a decent draft for edge rushers and interior defensive presence. So they can advance there. Penix can step in, improve. He improved at the end of the year, or he improved the team at the end of the year, showed that he was learning while he sat, and he'll step into the season this upcoming year with the starting role and hopefully able to take advantage of that. But it's a good spot for all of these teams, if they can keep running the ball the way they are, to get over the hump, make the playoffs potentially next year. Moving on to lowest yards per game allowed rushing. The top 8 teams made the playoffs, and 11 of the top 12 teams made the playoffs. The only outlier was the Dolphins at number 9, who had an 8-9 record, similar to the people in the top of the rushing leaders per game. This goes to show that running the ball allows you to control the game, and stopping the run allows you to take control of the game away from the opposing team. So if you're really stout against the run, and then you're really good at running the ball, well, that's just an easy recipe in the NFL right now to make the playoffs. And it's a very kind of forgotten thing as the value of running backs has gone down. Teams are starting to realize, and I think one of the things that will help that is this year's class being really good at running back, is that having a good running back holds value. I mean, just look at the Green Bay Packers and what Josh Jacobs did to that offense and how he allowed Jordan Love to continue to grow as a quarterback with his presence. I mean, I think it was a good showcase. Aaron Jones in Minnesota, another good showcase of what a good running back can do to a maligned quarterback or to a young quarterback. The running game is, I think, truly a quarterback's best friend. If you look back through the history, most teams, when they win, they have some semblance of a running game. And as the data shows here, it typically is top 10 in the league for the teams that do it. And we're going to look into the passing in a second, but the Eagles are a real outlier here because they were a great run team. They weren't the best pass team, and they won the Super Bowl. So I do think that we might see a little bit more running back love within teams, hopefully in contracts, because they do deserve to get paid more. As Saquon Barkley has come out and said with signing his extension, he hopes that it's like the rolling ball to get to the next people, the James Cooks of the world that are going to get paid next, and hope that they beat his deal and the money continues to go up as it has been with edge rushers and linemen and receivers and quarterbacks as well. Speaking of the quarterbacks, passing in the NFL right now does not equal winning. It's really it's actually remarkably alarming how much love quarterbacks get to how the correlation comes when it comes to passing yards at the end of the season. So getting into it, the number one passing offense last year missed the playoffs. That was the Bengals, who finished 8-9. The number 4 passing offense was the 49ers. The number 8 passing offense was the Seattle Seahawks, who did just miss it. And then you get into the teams that did make the playoffs that were below. You have the Chiefs finished at 14. The Commanders finished at 17. The Chargers at 19. The Broncos at 20. The Steelers at 27. And the Eagles sat at 29th. So they had the 4th worst passing offense throughout all of last season. If you're watching them play, their entire offense ran through Saquon Barkley. And really it was one of the things that helped them because I do think that Jalen Hurts doesn't have as many limitations as someone like Brock Purdy or Tua Tagovailoa has, but he does have limitations, and those get to be covered up when they're controlling the clock, when they're getting easy 3rd down, 4th down, 1st down, or 2nd down situations, and they're not asking him to go out there and say, you need to win this game for us. Very rarely is Jalen Hurts asked to do that, and just being able to play his role for the most part did wonders for them. The Steelers fought through some below average quarterback play all year and a lack of weapons around the quarterback they did put out there to make the playoffs, based strongly on a good defense and a solid run game. To a lesser degree, the Broncos and the Chargers are in a similar situation. The Chargers have a great quarterback. The Broncos have a young quarterback they're bringing along that they like very well. And, the running game and the defense helps out there. I think that these numbers just show that you need a complete team. You need a team with a good to great quarterback at the top, but that quarterback doesn't need to just put up numbers. They need to run the offense and make the plays that need to be made to get them to win ball games. And that's, at the end of the day, if you're rooting for a team, that's what it's all about. If you just want to win your fantasy league, then just go out there and throw for more yards, score more touchdowns, and don't worry about anything else. But if you're a fan rooting for your team, you want a well-rounded team. You want a good running game. You want to be good at stopping the run. And you want to throw the ball when it's needed. You don't want to be only throwing the ball. You don't want to be, not running the ball well. That's really what it boils down to. Now, with all of that stats and all of that said and in your head, I'm going to move on to my opinion on next season. I'm going to start in the NFC here. I think that the Commanders win the NFC East. They overtake the Eagles, the winners from last year, and the reigning Super Bowl champs, and they continue the streak for the last 20 seasons of no repeat NFC East champion. It's truly a microcosm of the NFL in the NFC East out there, where nobody repeats. It's really funny. But I think the Eagles have lost a lot of talent to free agency. I believe they will draft well, so I might change this once the draft happens. But for now, looking ahead, I think the steps the Commanders took to improve the team, the steps that Jaden Daniels can take to improve himself and have another year under his belt, help to push them to the top of the division. But moving on to the NFC North, I have the Lions once again winning that division. I understand the worry around them losing their coordinators. I get it. But that culture is just different. And I am someone who believes that you need a good culture to be a good winning team. And I think what Dan Campbell is doing out there is huge. I think that it transcends his coordinators, and this will be the first time that he gets to prove that is the case. And you also have to realize that the two guys that he hired and as their coordinators weren't well-known guys. Like, he was kind of taking shots in the dark where people were like, who are these guys that he's making coordinators that did what they did with the team and now have the opportunities they have, with the Jets and the Bears respectively, that I find it hard to believe the people that are like, he can't do it again. I think he can do it again. He did it once, he could do it again, and if he doesn't, I still think the team has plenty of talent. Their defense got very hurt last year and really, limited their ability to continue on in the playoffs. So they come back healthy. They'll make some good adds. They've always been a good team drafting. So I think they'll come together. They'll win the division. And I think it'll be easier than last year. If they go 15-2 or 16-1 or whatever it is, or even 14-3, I don't expect one of the teams, the Packers, the Bears, or the Vikings, to hang with them the whole season the way the Vikings did last year. I think they got a little lucky with that. So I think they have a much easier time winning the division, as they probably get to 13-plus wins. But in the NFC South, moving on, the Buccaneers, I think, repeat again as the champions. I do think the Falcons put up a fight similar to the Rams Seahawks last year. They might even tie for the lead. But I like the Buccaneers as a complete team. I like the fact that they have had a few years of success, that Baker Mayfield is really the right guy to be leading that team, and that kind of, chip on my shoulder mentality that they always have. But I don't expect them to be world beaters. The Buccaneers will look bad in some games. They'll look unbeatable in other games. But the division is still lacking. I think the Panthers are still at least a year away. I think the Saints are like 4 years away. And I think the Falcons probably are a year away, only because I don't think their defense matches up with what they could do offensively. So unless even if their offense is great, I think as Joe Burrow proved last year, that doesn't mean anything in the long run. But the last division for the NFC is the NFC West. I have the Rams winning again. What that young defense was able to do at the end of the season is mind-blowing. The progression that they showed throughout the year to then finish in the postseason, absolutely shutting down the Vikings. And you could argue should have beaten the Eagles in the division round as well. I think that them getting Matt Stafford back was huge. Him being able to make another run with that LA team, even better. They swapped in Devontae Adams, and they swapped out Cooper Kupp, who was hurt a lot. I think that's a good fit for them. It gives them their X receiver to the Z slot that Puka Nacua now gets full access to, because Kupp won't be taking any of the reps there. But I do expect that the Seattle Seahawks put up a fight. I think that one of the big elephants in the room is the Niners. I don't expect the Niners to... I expect this to be their actual rebuilding year leading into next season. I think that the teardown that they did partly this offseason was something they should have done 2 years ago. So I don't know. I'm not the biggest fan of them. I mean, they need to draft better. They need to get some help at some positions. I personally would have traded Ayuk, so I would have traded Samuel too, but that's besides the point. We'll see what happens there. And with Arizona, I think that they're just a middle of the pack team with a middle of the pack quarterback and they'll play middle of the pack football. I think that's just what they are. Although Marvin Harrison Jr. being what he was supposed to be would be a big help to that offense overall. But getting to my wild cards, I have the Eagles taking the first wild card. I think that, they win 10 to 12 games. The Commanders just win 12 to 13 games and get the division from them. Like I said, when we talked about the West, I think the Seahawks keep it close with the Rams. So I have them getting my second wild card, probably getting to 11 wins this year. I do like Sam Darnold over Geno Smith. I don't like Darnold going back to a defensive coach after the success he had with an offensive coach. So we'll see what the offensive staff can do, especially now that they don't have DK Metcalf, but they have Cooper Kupp. Jackson Smith and Jigba really came into his own as the year went on last year. So look out for him to really step into superstardom in the role that he has with the Seahawks, and I mean that young defense is coming for you, so look out for that as well. I think they might grab an edge rusher early in the draft to really bring everything together. But they got talent out there. And then my third wild card, I have the Bears. So I really believe in the Chicago Bears. I like Ben Johnson. I love that hire. I like him for Caleb Williams. I like the fact, like we discussed earlier, they didn't turn the ball over a lot, which is huge for a young quarterback. A lot of times young quarterbacks will be careless with the ball, and that was one of Caleb Williams' biggest detractors coming into the draft, is that they don't look at he can get like happy feet, and he can get to a point where he will want to make that extra play. And I think Ben Johnson will come in there, simplify it. They'll get a running back, and to do the things that they did in Detroit, where they had almost the thunder and lightning of Gibbs and Montgomery. They'll have DeAndre Swift. They'll have a rookie come in to be a little bit more quicker than Swift is. So, and that'll help keep Swift healthy. But I think their defense also has pieces. They help fix the offensive line because sacks were a huge deal last year on offense for the Bears. So I think they put it together, and they're able to take that third wild card spot, and that leaves the Packers, Vikings, and Falcons as the first out. For the Packers, I still think they need more weapons on offense at receiver or at tight end. They have a decent tight end, but I think they just need a top dog type weapon. I think Jaden Reed is better off as a number 2. And I think Tucker Kraft was their tight end last year for the most part. I think that he's better as like a second, third option, rather than a featured option. So I think they need that featured option, but they can keep running Josh Jacobs out there and hope that it holds up. But their defense is also getting a little up there in age, so we'll see how the draft goes for them. For the Vikings, I think that this squarely is on the shoulders of J.J. McCarthy not 100% adapting to the NFL at the level that Sam Darnold did. Now, I agree with their decision. They made the right decision to go with McCarthy over paying Darnold or overpaying someone else. So I agree with that decision, but I don't like how he didn't. It's not like he sat last year and got practice reps and everything. He was hurt, so he was in rehab, recovering. I'm sure he knows the playbook backwards and forwards, but knowing the playbook and knowing, in the moment to make the adjustments is something that you learn through reps. So I think he's going to take some lumps. He'll look good. He'll improve as the year goes on, but he'll give some problems that will keep them out of the playoffs. And then the Falcons, I don't think there's enough wins out there to have two teams out of the NFC South. I don't think that I think that they're probably one of the least talented divisions in the NFC. And I don't think it's very close. I think that the Falcons, 9-8 maybe, and they miss the playoffs. And those are the 3 first outs that I have. So now we're going to move on to the AFC. I have the Bills winning the AFC East once again. I think they win it pretty easy by 3 to 4 games. I don't think the Jets will be anything more than a 500 team at best. I think similarly about the Dolphins, and the Patriots can be a wild card. I'm a big fan of Drake May, but I'm skeptical of other aspects of the team, but I'll get into that in a second when we get to wild cards. But I want to go to the AFC North. I have the Ravens winning once again. I have them in a close race with the Bengals. I think the Steelers take a huge step back, not having even average quarterback play. I think that they're going to end up needing to draft someone that isn't exactly ready. Like, I don't think Jackson Dart or Jalen Milroe should be starting right away, so that's who they end up going with, which I think that they probably end up with Milroe off the reports that I've been seeing. And in that case, Milroe needs to sit. He has to sit. He has to get more accurate. Otherwise, he's going to be just a chicken with his head cut off running around back there like he was in his last season at Bama, when people realized, hey, just make him throw the ball and he'll beat himself. So he's got holes. So I have the Ravens winning. Their defense is a little old. Their offense is a little old. So I think that they're reaching the end of their absolute dominance. But I don't think the Bengals are able to overtake them, as they have their own defensive issues as documented last year. But in the AFC South, I have the Houston Texans winning once again. I have them winning by a game or two over the Jaguars and Colts, who I think it comes pretty similar. They both finish at 9-8, 8-9, and the Texans finish at 10-6 or 11-5, or 11-6 or 10-7, and that's just how it goes. Similar to the NFC South, I think the Texans are just the best of the worst out there, which is good for them. They get to keep going to the playoffs. CJ Stroud gets to hopefully improve on the sophomore slump that he had last year and get back to at least his rookie year form. But the last division I want to talk about is the AFC West. I currently have the Chargers winning the AFC West. I have them barely winning it. I have them taking it in a tiebreaker or in a one-game difference over the Chiefs. I think the Chargers have a more complete team. I think the Chiefs have some issues to work out. And I think on the Chiefs' offensive line is just incredibly infuriating that they threw money at it and then they just took the money away from it to pay other people. I don't exactly understand getting rid of Tooney to be able to pay Nick Bolton. I like Nick Bolton as a player. I know they do too. I might have preferred the guard that worked outside at left tackle and made it work over the middle linebacker with some coverage ability and decent against the run, who I hate to say it, but you probably can get that type of player in the draft a lot easier than the swing guard or swing tackle, whatever you want to call Tooney as he is now. But the draft will be a big part in this, but I have the Chargers as the better team, and I have them winning out over the Chiefs next year for the AFC West. Getting into the wild cards, I have the Chiefs as the top wild card. I think that they end up similar to the Vikings, where there's some gap between them and the next wild card teams in their record. But the second wild card, I do have the New England Patriots here. Like I said, with Drake May, I'm a fan of Drake May. I'm a really big fan of the hire they made with Mike Vrabel. I thought that he should have gotten his choice of whatever job he wanted last year, and I think that he probably did have his choice of jobs this year, and he chose a not bad destination in New England where he has a lot of connections, and they have a good base of talent. I think that they're the team that goes top 5 pick into playoffs. I think that that's just... It's a boon for them. I think that they lost more games than they should have because they kind of let it happen. So I think that they take the next step and they make it into the playoffs. My third wild card, I do have the Cincinnati Bengals getting in. I don't think you can keep Joe Burrow down for that long. They just re-signed their 2 receivers, which is an interesting way to move their money. If Trey Hendrickson either actually holds out into the season or gets traded, I feel a little bit differently about this, because I think that Trey Hendrickson should have won Defensive Player of the Year last year, not to take anything away from Patrick Surtain II, who did win. I just think what Hendrickson did on a horrible defense last year in Cincinnati is incredible. He led the NFL in sacks, and he was doing it while getting quadruple teamed because they had nobody else to rush the passer, and they didn't have good coverage either behind him, so people were getting the ball out fast, and he still led the NFL in sacks. So I think that was very impressive what he did, and he should get paid accordingly because of it. So my first 3 out are the Denver Broncos, who I just think, if I had the Bengals overtaking them at a point. They almost choked that away. They ended up, the Chiefs ended up just kind of rolling over in the last week of the season to be like, hey, we don't want the Bengals in either. So just here, have this win. We'll start Carson Wentz. So they kind of let the Broncos get in. I don't think that happens this year or this next year. The next two teams out I have are the Jaguars and the Colts, who I think, like I said, end up at 8-9, 9-8, and they end up as the next out. I will just speak very quickly on the Steelers, who I think end up at like 7-10, 8-9 maybe as well. Their quarterback situation is so infuriating, and with less of a running game as well, I know the draft can still come, but they haven't signed anyone really to replace Najee Harris. Not that he is the best of running backs. They have Jalen Warren, but I don't think he's a feature. So I have a lot of questions about them. There's also the possibility that TJ Watt's contract situation gets played out too far, and there's some slight rumors about him being traded. I don't think it actually happens, at least this offseason, but a lot of uncertainty there. And I also am someone who feels that Mike Tomlin got his due, and they should mutually agree that they've gotten all they can from each other and let both of them go different ways, to kind of break up the circle of mediocrity. It's great that Tomlin's never had a losing season, but all of that those winning seasons, a lot of it is they went 500 or they went one game over 500. And there's not a lot of playoff success to follow that. So he's a good coach. You don't want to get rid of a good coach, but sometimes you have to. Andy Reid left the Eagles. Who was the guy from the Cardinals that went to the Buccaneers? Bruce Arians. He did a good job in Arizona, and then he left and went to the Buccaneers. It is just something that happens. Sometimes you have run out of time, and I think that that is where we are at with Tomlin and the Steelers. But that playoff scenario that I set up, it has 4 teams making it that didn't last year. That is the Seattle Seahawks, the Chicago Bears, the New England Patriots, and the Cincinnati Bengals. The draft will change a lot of this, potentially. We will see what happens long term. And I'll probably tackle this topic again of future projections within the next month or so, as we get into the doldrums after the draft. But that has been this episode. Thank you guys so much if you stayed this long. Please subscribe, give me a follow. And if you enjoyed this, I will catch you next week.